The winter of 1603 enveloped Richmond Palace in a silence that weighed like a tombstone. In the royal chamber, a pale and aging figure lay motionless on a velvet-covered bed. It was Elizabeth Tudor, daughter of a king who defied the Pope and a mother who died by the sword. Around her, candles flickered with a faint light, reflecting in mirrors draped with black cloths. No one was to see the face of the Virgin Queen die. As the air filled with incense and prayers, the elderly monarch kept her eyes open, fixed on the ceiling, as if waiting for an answer that never came. Her dry lips barely moved, murmuring a name. Robert. But in the room, only the sound of the wind battering the stained glass windows reigned. Outside, England prepared to lose its goddess, but also to discover the truth that had been hidden for centuries. For over 40 years, Elizabeth I reigned alone, without a husband, without children, never sharing her throne or her bed. She proclaimed herself married to England, a vow that chroniclers glorified as a symbol of purity and power. However, beneath the golden crown and the lead-painted skin hid something more than pride, an invisible wound, a deep fear that no one in her court dared to name. They say that in her final days, before ordering all the mirrors removed from her bedchamber, Elizabeth confessed to her private confessor, "I was a queen of men, but a slave to my ghost." No one knew what she meant. Some spoke of treason, others of impossible love, and the most daring, of a secret so dark that, if revealed, it would have destroyed the myth of the Virgin Queen. The tale you are about to hear is not a simple story of power and loneliness. It is a journey through the darkest corners of the mind of a woman who defied the world, but who could not escape herself. Her purity was her prison, her crown, her condemnation. Because the real question was never why Elizabeth did not want to marry, but what forced her not to. Elizabeth was born marked even before taking her first breath. It was the year 1533, and her arrival in the world was celebrated with a mixture of joy and fear. Her father, Henry VIII, had broken with the Catholic Church to marry her mother, Anne Boleyn, defying the Pope and all of Europe. England was bleeding from within. Monasteries destroyed, priests hanged, temples plundered in the name of a new god, the power of the monarch. That little girl with reddish hair and a piercing gaze was the fruit of a forbidden love and a political crime. Anne Boleyn dreamed of giving the king a male heir, but instead of a prince, a girl was born. From day one, Elizabeth learned that her existence was a disappointment. At the age of 3, she saw her mother turned into a traitor and beheaded at the Tower of London. They say the executioner raised Anne's head before the people, while the echo of prayers mingled with the cry of crows. That was the future queen's first lesson. At court, love is paid for with blood. She grew up watching men change their faith, their loyalty, and their wives as easily as they changed their cloaks. Henry VIII had 6 wives. 2 were executed. The rest died or were repudiated. In that palace of marble and fear, Elizabeth understood that devotion was a luxury that killed. Chroniclers speak of a quiet, curious girl, too intelligent for her age. She learned Latin, Greek, and French, while other girls learned to embroider. Her tutors called her the Little Sphinx, because no one ever knew what she was thinking. But at night, alone in her bedchamber, Elizabeth asked God why her mother had died for love. The castle walls returned the echo of silence. From then on, she decided she would never be a victim, that she would never allow a man to dictate her destiny. But that determination, born of pain, also separated her from the human world. Her soul began to dress itself in iron. Modern psychologists would speak of trauma, of emotional dissociation, of the inability to trust. But in the 16th century, fear disguised itself as virtue. The girl learned to smile politely and to distrust everyone, even God. It is said that when she turned 13, she visited her mother's tomb in the Tower Chapel. She touched the cold stone and said with a firm voice, "I will not cry for you, mother. I will make them kneel before me." In that instant, an orphan's oath became a queen's prophecy. Destiny had marked her with blood, and only power could wash it away. Elizabeth's adolescence was a minefield. After her father's death, the English throne became a chessboard where every move could mean life or death. She was barely 14 when she was sent to live with her stepmother, Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's last wife. In that house, among tutors and advisors, appeared the figure of Thomas Seymour, an ambitious, attractive man 20 years her senior. Chroniclers of the time spoke of innocent games, but history, when viewed without the veil of Victorian modesty, reveals something darker. Seymour used to enter Elizabeth's room at dawn while she was still asleep. Sometimes he would wake her with kisses on the forehead. Other times he would cut her dress as a joke while laughing with her and Catherine. The servants looked the other way. The court, as always, remained silent. When Catherine discovered what was happening, the scandal was so great that Elizabeth was sent away under the pretext of continuing her studies. But the damage was already done. That experience would mark her forever. From then on, whenever a man got too close, she would step back with a smile that seemed kind, but hid an invisible wall. Seymour would end up executed shortly after, accused of treason. Elizabeth did not shed a tear. In her diary she wrote, "A king may lose his head, a man may lose his soul, but a woman has only one thing to lose, and she must never surrender it." That thought transformed into her personal religion. While other young women dreamed of love, Elizabeth dreamed of controlling it. She discovered that her intelligence was a weapon sharper than any sword, and she began to use it. She studied theology, politics, philosophy, and above all, the art of silence. She learned that at court, those who stay silent survive, and those who desire die. Portraits from those years show a young woman with a serene gaze, dressed in sober tones, her hair tied back, her skin pale. But behind that serenity hid a mind that analyzed every gesture, every word, every shadow. She was the solitary rose among swords, beautiful but surrounded by danger. Some contemporaries described her as cold, others as virtuous. The truth was more complex. Elizabeth did not reject love. She feared it. She knew that behind every promise hid a debt, behind every caress, a betrayal. And in a world where men could dispose of a woman's body and name, she chose to be inaccessible. Every night, when silence covered the castle, Elizabeth would look in the mirror and whisper, "I will not be like my mother." But upon touching her neck, where she imagined the blade that cut Anne Boleyn's life short, a rebellious tear would fall. It was the only moment the future queen allowed the wounded girl to breathe. Thus, between fear and ambition, the myth was born. A young woman who learned that love was a trap and that loneliness could be her shield. A princess who already dreamed of a crown, but knew that by placing it upon her head, she would lose everything that made her human. On November 17, 1558, the bells of all England rang relentlessly. A young woman, with a fiery gaze and lips sealed by duty, ascended to the throne. Elizabeth Tudor, daughter of the king who had defied Rome, became the sovereign of an empire divided by faith, treason, and fear. That day, London was tinged with joy, but behind every cry of "Long live the Queen" hid a question that would obsess all of Europe. Who will the Virgin Queen marry? Foreign ambassadors competed for her favor. Philip II of Spain, widower of her sister Mary, courted her in the name of diplomacy and Catholicism. The princes of Sweden, Austria, and France sent portraits, jewels, and promises. But Elizabeth smiled and refused, as if the entire destiny of the continent hung on one of her smiles. And in a way it did, because her decision did not only risk her happiness, but the future of the country. If she chose a Catholic, she would lose the support of the Protestants. If she chose a foreigner, England would become a satellite of another crown. If she chose an Englishman, she would unleash a civil war. To marry was a sentence. To remain alone, a provocation. And yet, Elizabeth chose the impossible, to choose no one. During the early years of her reign, she played with the ambassadors like a cat with its prey. She promised meetings, delayed answers, and flirted with alliances without committing. Every marriage proposal became an act of diplomacy, a game of chess where she was both queen and player. But power has a price that is not paid with gold, but with the soul. The more she clung to the crown, the more loneliness devoured her. The throne she had dreamed of so much transformed into a golden prison. The palace walls seemed to listen to her, but never answer her. The people adored her, but no one could touch her. The court feared her more than it loved her. Sometimes on moonless nights, Elizabeth would rise from her bed and walk alone through the corridors of Whitehall. She touched the walls, as if seeking to feel something human beneath the cold stones. They say that on one of those nights she whispered, "I am free, and yet I am chained." Her confessor later wrote that the Queen had learned Machiavelli's lesson. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. And in that choice, Elizabeth sealed her destiny. Her virginity became a political symbol, her body a border between kingdoms, her name a myth. But myths, like ancient gods, feed on sacrifices. Every proposal she rejected was a part of herself that died. Every diplomatic smile was a held-back tear. And while the world saw her as a goddess of purity, a different echo resonated within her heart, that of a woman who had buried her desire under the weight of a crown. Thus began Elizabeth's metamorphosis, from a daughter of sin to a sacred symbol. The girl who grew up amidst blood and fear became the queen who turned loneliness into power. But in her gaze, behind the golden majesty, the same question that tormented her childhood continued to shine. Is purity really worth the price of a life? Among the men who surrounded her, only one managed to break through the wall Elizabeth had built around herself. Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. Tall, elegant, with a lively gaze and an enigmatic smile. He was a man made of contradictions, the son of an executed traitor, a prisoner in the Tower of London during Elizabeth's youth. They both shared the same captivity, and perhaps because of that, the same wound. When she ascended to the throne, he returned to her side, and from that day on, they were never entirely separated. In the early years of her reign, Dudley became her confidant, her advisor, her shadow. Ambassadors wrote alarmed letters to their kings. The Queen thinks of nothing but Lord Robert. He accompanied her on walks, at banquets, at Mass. The doors of his chambers connected directly to those of the Queen, a privilege no other man had ever had. But scandal soon erupted. Dudley was married. His wife, Amy Robsart, lived far from the palace, sick and forgotten. In September 1560, her lifeless body was found at the foot of a staircase, her neck broken. The chronicles spoke of an accident, the people of a murder. From that moment on, Elizabeth's name was forever stained with the shadow of sin. Even so, Dudley remained by her side. She protected him, showered him with honors, and made him an earl. She never dared to marry him, although many claimed she loved him like no other. In public, she treated him with coldness. In private, their glances said what words kept silent. Her advisors feared that passion would put the crown at risk. Elizabeth knew this, and so she transformed love into a political game, a cruel game. Whenever Dudley pulled away, she sent him letters full of reproaches and tenderness. Whenever he got too close, she humiliated him before the court. It was a dance of fire and ice, of desire and power. Some modern historians have seen in this relationship the reflection of a deep emotional wound, the fear of repeating her mother's tragedy. To love meant to lose, and to lose was to die. That is why Elizabeth kept her heart on a knife's edge, feeding a passion that could not be consummated. Dudley represented everything she desired and everything she had to reject. In him she saw the lover, the traitor, the mirror of her father, but also the only man who understood her. When he died in 1588, after the defeat of the Spanish Armada, Elizabeth received his last letter. She kept it in a box marked with the initials R.D., and until her death, kept it under her pillow. They say that upon reading it, her eyes filled with tears, but she did not cry. She simply murmured, "Now, Robert, we are both free." That freedom, however, was another form of condemnation. With Dudley's death, the last vestige of humanity left in the Virgin Queen died. From then on, her heart turned to stone, her smile into an emblem, and her body into a political relic. The woman who had once been capable of loving disappeared under the weight of the myth. Only the Queen remained, that immortal figure who had to keep feigning purity to sustain an empire. After the death of Robert Dudley, something changed forever in Elizabeth's face. Her skin, once rosy and luminous, began to be covered with a thick layer of white powder, a mixture of lead and vinegar. Her lips were painted a deep red, and her hair, already graying, was hidden beneath golden wigs. As time went on, the woman disappeared, and in her place remained an image, the portrait of an immortal queen, ageless, bodiless, soulless. It was a mask, and she knew it. Every morning before receiving her ministers, she spent hours in front of the mirror. She ordered her ladies to apply layer after layer of makeup, as if by doing so she could erase the passage of time. Those who saw her up close said her skin was scarred by open wounds from the lead poison that was slowly killing her. But Elizabeth preferred to die poisoned by her own disguise, rather than show herself as human before men. It was then that she uttered a phrase that would become eternal. "I am married to England." That declaration was not a simple metaphor. It was a confession and a condemnation. She renounced love, the flesh, and motherhood to become the incarnation of her kingdom. England would be her husband, her lover, her child, and her tomb. The theologians of the time compared her to the Virgin Mary, pure, untouchable, a mediator between God and men. But beneath that devotion hid a cruel irony. While the Virgin was chosen by divine grace, Elizabeth was forced by fear and loneliness. Her purity was a political invention, a strategy to maintain authority over a world ruled by men who feared female desire. Every public gesture of the Queen transformed into a liturgy. When she walked among her subjects, the crowd fell to their knees as if before a saint. When she smiled, the nation interpreted omens of prosperity. When she grew angry, the nobles trembled as if the judgment of God were approaching. She knew this, and she played with it. She became an actress in her own myth. Sometimes in the silences of the night, the weight of her oath crushed her. Her confessor noted that Elizabeth prayed on her knees for hours, not seeking forgiveness, but oblivion. She prayed to forget that she was ever a woman, that she ever had a heart. Later philosophers would see in her the birth of the modern concept of power, the individual who renounces themselves to become a symbol. Like a pagan goddess, Elizabeth sacrificed her humanity to rule from a distance, but that sacrifice left its mark. It is said that, on occasion, she would order all the palace windows closed and wander alone among the tapestries, speaking to the portraits of her youth. "That woman I was no longer exists," she would murmur. "Only the one who must continue to reign remains." And so, day after day, layer after layer of makeup, calculated word after calculated word, Elizabeth ceased to be a person and transformed into an idea. The idea of an unattainable purity, of a perfection that no human being could sustain without breaking. And she, deep down, was already broken. In the heart of the 16th century, faith was gunpowder in politics, the spark that could ignite it. While Elizabeth consolidated her power, the ghost of Catholicism never ceased to haunt her. Rome had excommunicated her, and Pope Pius V had declared that whoever killed her would be serving God. From then on, the Queen's life became a game of chess, where every shadow could be an assassin and every prayer a betrayal. Into this setting entered another woman, as fascinating as she was dangerous. Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots. Elizabeth's cousin, a devout Catholic, and the legitimate heir according to many, Mary was everything Elizabeth had renounced being: a mother, a wife, and a symbol of desire. Her presence was a living reminder of what Elizabeth had sacrificed for power. At first, the English queen tried to keep her alive. She admired and feared her at the same time. But Mary became the banner for all the conspiracies seeking to restore the Catholic faith in England. In 1586, after the discovery of the Babington Plot, a plan to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the throne, the monarch faced an impossible decision. To sign her cousin's death warrant was to eliminate a threat, but also to murder a reflection of herself. Both were women who had defied the rules of a masculine world. Both had been crowned too young. Both had loved and suffered for men. But only one could survive. On February 8, 1587, Mary Stuart was led to the scaffold. She wore a red dress, the color of martyrdom. Before placing her head on the block, she said aloud, "I die in the Catholic faith and in the name of Christ." When the executioner raised her head before those present, the silence was absolute. In that moment, all of England understood that the blood of one queen had sealed the reign of another. Elizabeth received the news in silence. Witnesses recounted that she remained motionless for hours, her face covered by her hands. Then she stood up and uttered a single phrase, "I have killed my sister in Christ." From that day on, the gleam in her eyes was never the same. The courtiers noticed a change. Her character became harsher, her gaze emptier. At banquets, where she once laughed, she now only observed. The court spoke in whispers, fearful of awakening her wrath. Poets praised her as a goddess, but between the lines the tragedy could be read. She who had defeated empires had not been able to conquer her loneliness. Some priests said that Mary's execution was the price God demanded of Elizabeth for her virginity, that her body had remained intact, but her soul had been stained with the sin of power. She knew it. Every night when she knelt before the altar, she repeated a prayer that no one else knew. "Lord, if I am your servant, why did you make me an executioner?" As the years passed, the death of Mary Stuart transformed into a symbol and a curse. Elizabeth had saved her kingdom, but she had lost something deeper, the part of herself that still believed in forgiveness. From then on, those who looked at her saw a different gleam in her eyes. It was not that of royalty, but of guilt. The woman who had been called the Virgin Queen became something else, a widow of the soul, condemned to reign over the ghosts she herself had created. Time, that enemy that not even crowns can defeat, began to claim its dead. By the end of the 16th century, Elizabeth had survived wars, betrayals, epidemics, and impossible loves. But what she could not overcome was the weight of silence. One by one, the faces that had shaped her world began to disappear. Robert Dudley, her confidant; Walsingham, her most loyal spy; her ladies-in-waiting, her musicians, her poets, all died before her. And the court, which once was filled with laughter and banquets, transformed into a perfumed mausoleum. Those who entered her chambers described an unsettling atmosphere. The windows closed, the tapestries dark, the air thick with wax and dust. The queen spoke little. Sometimes in the middle of the night, the maids heard her murmur names. "Robert, Mary, Mother," as if the dead continued to visit her. Or perhaps it was her own conscience, taking shape once again in the shadows. She began to refuse to sleep. She feared that if she closed her eyes, the ghost would claim her. She spent hours sitting, motionless, watching the flames of the candles slowly burn down, as if she saw her life reflected in them. She ordered all the mirrors removed from her room. She could no longer bear her own reflection. "Every wrinkle," she would say, "is a betrayal of time. But time does not betray, it only reveals." Her body also began to betray her. Her legs ached, her breath grew short, her skin was scarred by the lead she had used as makeup for years. The doctor spoke of exhaustion, but the priest whispered another word: penance, because no one believed that a soul burdened with so many secrets could die in peace. In her final years, Elizabeth clung to power with a mixture of fear and desperation. She refused to speak of successors, fearing that by naming another king, she would sign her own death warrant. Her pride remained intact, but her mind was fracturing. Some witnesses claimed she saw apparitions, the specter of Mary Stuart crossing the halls, Dudley's face in every shadow. One night she even swore she heard a female voice whisper, "At last we are equals." The poets who had once glorified her as a goddess now secretly wrote premature elegies. Shakespeare, still young, portrayed her melancholy in the characters of queens who lose their humanity in the name of duty. History was beginning to write the epitaph of a woman who had preferred to be a myth rather than a mortal. In March 1603, Elizabeth fell into a sort of trance. She remained seated for hours on end, without eating, without sleeping, refusing to lie down, as if she feared the earth would not receive her. When her advisors asked her to rest, she replied with a whisper, "If I lie down, I will never rise again." And she was right. That night she ordered all the candles in the palace to be lit. They say that when the last flame went out, the Virgin Queen finally exhaled a long, almost imperceptible sigh, and silence took hold of England. Thus died Elizabeth of Fern, alone, without heirs, without love, but master of a legacy that transformed England into an empire. Her body was embalmed, her face covered with white powder, her expression serene, as if she had made peace with her ghosts. On the tomb where she rests, next to Mary Stuart, an inscription is engraved that still causes chills. Here lie two sister queens in hope. But those who know history know that this hope was never reconciliation, but punishment. For centuries, historians spoke of Elizabeth as the Virgin Queen, a symbol of virtue, intelligence, and power. But behind that sacralized image hid a darker truth, one that official history preferred to bury. The question was not why she did not want to marry, but why she could not do so. And the answers, scattered among letters, medical reports, and silenced testimonies, paint a more human and more terrible portrait. Some court documents, preserved in the archives of Hatfield House, hint that Elizabeth may have suffered severe physical damage during her adolescence, perhaps as a consequence of abuse by Thomas Seymour. Contemporary doctors mentioned female anomalies and secret pains that prevented her from conceiving. Other rumors passed in hushed tones among the ladies of the palace suggested that the queen was not entirely a woman in the sense that the era understood, that her body had been an anatomical enigma that only she and her doctors knew. But to reduce the mystery to a diagnosis would be to simplify it, because beyond the body, Elizabeth's true confinement was spiritual. In a world dominated by men, she understood that she could only survive if she denied everything that made her vulnerable. Her virginity was not a mystical choice, but a political strategy, an armor built with fear and cunning. Every time she rejected a suitor, she sent a message. England would submit to no one. Her purity was the metaphor for absolute power, the denial of all submission. And yet that power came at a devastating price. The woman who had been adored as a goddess ended up becoming a prisoner of her own myth. The court celebrated her, the people idolized her, but she knew that her divinity was only the disguise of her loneliness. The lead-white face she showed the world was not a symbol of perfection, but a mask for a body deteriorated by guilt and poison. For 400 years, history repeated her name with admiration. But today, looking beyond the legends, we discover something unsettling. Elizabeth I was not the Virgin Queen by choice, but by condemnation. She was the victim of a world that did not allow her to be a woman without ceasing to be a queen. Her chastity was a form of power, yes, but also of mutilation, a constant sacrifice between duty and desire, between the state and the flesh. Some modern philosophers have compared her figure to that of an inverted Christ, a redeemer who does not save, but sacrifices herself to uphold order. Her crown was her cross, her virginity, her martyrdom. In recent years, new forensic studies have attempted to explain what history kept silent. Some believe that Elizabeth may have suffered from a uterine malformation, others that she simply swore not to repeat her mother's fate. But perhaps the true secret is neither biological nor political. Perhaps it is psychological. Because trauma, when it becomes identity, stops hurting and begins to rule. And that was what she did. Rule from the wound. The priest who accompanied her in her final days wrote a phrase in his diary that few read. The queen died with her lips closed, but with her eyes open, as if she finally saw something that we did not. Perhaps in that final moment, Elizabeth ceased to be a symbol and became a woman once again. Perhaps for the first time, she allowed herself to feel without fear, without duty, without a crown. And perhaps only then did the Virgin Queen know what she had denied all her life: peace.